additional effects of the under-occupancy penalty. Thank you, Ms Doris. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship today. Our debate today is on the regional impact of the bedroom tax, and it's an important debate coming on the back of the government's recent judicial review defeat in the Court of Appeal, where it was determined that the bedroom tax discriminates against victims of domestic violence and the families of severely disabled children. And I'd like to take the opportunity early in this debate to pay tribute to campaigners up and down the country who have put considerable energy and effort into challenging this iniquitous tax and raising public awareness of the government's continuing attempt to defend the indefensible. People such as Paul and Susan Rutherford, who have led the charge with one of the Court of Appeal cases on behalf of their severely disabled grandson, Warren, and Alan Lloyd of Cardiff against the bedroom tax, who voluntarily helps victims of the bedroom tax in my constituency of Cardiff Central and across South Wales by preparing and presenting their appeals. I spoke to Alan Lloyd yesterday as he was on his way to appear at yet another tribunal to present an appeal on behalf of a woman whose long-time home is at risk because of this tax. And it's clear from the honourable members present here today that the impact of the tax remains an important issue to many people, and that's not just limited to those who are paying the tax itself. We on these benches have opposed the bedroom tax ever since its introduction, and it's clear that since this grossly unpopular Conservative and Liberal Democrat policy was forced on the public, what has happened is exactly what we warned. The bedroom tax is not working. It's not achieving the aims the government set out to implement. And as it's doing so, it's hurting some of the poorest and most vulnerable in our society through absolutely no fault of their own. Of course, I'll give way.
Gerald Jones. Lavery.
Can I, first of all, thank my honourable friend for bringing this really important issue to the floor of the House. My honourable friend is a lawyer and has been for many years, and normally if there's Court of Appeal judgments, then the people would adhere to these judgments. On this case, the government once again is ignoring what was said in the Court of Appeal. What is the right way, and the decent way, and the honourable way that this government should deal with the judgment from the Court of Appeal and listen to what's happening to those thousands of people out there who are suffering as a consequence of this now unlawful and illegal tax?
Can we make interventions and not speeches from now on? Thank you. Jo Stevens.
I thank my honourable friend for his intervention, and the honourable thing to do, obviously, would be to accept the decision of the Court of Appeal, but instead the government is proceeding to the Supreme Court, and the decision is expected, I think, at the end of this month, early next month. Bedroom tax, along with tripling tuition fees for students, are two of the most painful scars left by the 5 years of the Conservative and Liberal Democrat coalition. And I will take every opportunity to continue to remind the House that the bedroom tax would never have been introduced without the eager help of the Liberal Democrats, including my predecessor. Nearly 500,000 households and nearly 750,000 people have been hit by this cruel policy. 2/3 of the households affected by the bedroom tax include a person with a disability. The tax impacts on 60,000 carers, people who are undertaking demanding and challenging responsibilities and are being punished for doing so. 57% of those having to pay the tax have had to cut back on household basics, such as food and heating, things that we all take for granted. The bedroom tax has had a corrosive effect on many different households. Whether that's a single parent who needs a spare room for when their children visit as part of agreed contact visit arrangements following separation or divorce, or grandparents who help with looking after their grandchildren, allowing parents to be able to manage shift working and other working patterns, all because of family breakdown. Or people with severe disabilities who use their spare room for their medical equipment or care, like those needing, for example, kidney dialysis. Of course, I'll give way.
Constituency of Hackney South and Shoreditch, and one of the invidious parts of this tax is that if you have two children who are of an age that are supposed to share a bedroom, but one of them is within reach of the next birthday that would qualify them for a second bedroom, they're hit by the bedroom tax. So it's a fluctuating tax which hits people particularly hard.
Jo Stevens.
My honourable friend makes a very good point, because the tax itself raises that level of uncertainty. People can't budget. They don't know because their circumstances are changing, and because of the fluctuating nature of the tax, it impacts them more heavily at different times. There are also those who've been victims of domestic violence and rape, whose lives are at risk and need the protection of a panic room. The particular focus of this debate is on the regional impact it's had, and I would like to take some time to outline the impact on my constituents in Cardiff Central, but also more broadly within Wales, obviously a nation rather than a region. In Wales, there are 31,217 people affected by the bedroom tax, and there are just under 500,000 people living in social rented accommodation across Wales. The bedroom tax has had a huge impact across Wales, affecting proportionally more housing benefit claimants in Wales than anywhere else in Great Britain. 46% of claimants in Wales are impacted, compared with 31% for the UK as a whole. And across the whole of Cardiff, there are 3,015 households currently paying the bedroom tax, and nearly 500 of those live in my own constituency of Cardiff Central. The cost of the bedroom tax to each of those households affected will be £3,500 during this Parliament. That's £3,500 for each household, and I'm sure I don't need to explain to most honourable members here what £3,500 means to the families in our constituencies, especially the poorest families, families who are visiting our surgeries up and down the country every week. £3,500 that would otherwise be spent on basic necessities such as food, heating, clothes and shoes. And the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions has claimed that the bedroom tax would encourage societal movement. But when the bedroom tax was introduced, it affected around 3,500 households across Cardiff, and there were just over 100 smaller properties available for people to move into. Now, I'll readily admit that maths isn't my strong point, but even I can work out that that sum does not work. Of course I'll give way.
Giving away, congratulate her on obtaining this debate.
Simpson.
She will know that Northern Ireland didn't implement the bedroom tax, but it has cost us financially not to do that. But when we looked at the issues that she has quite rightly put forward, especially our older generation, number one, we didn't have the housing stock, but from a moral point of view, and we felt the hardship was just too great to put on the older people.
Joe Stevens.
Intervention, and it raises again the iniquitous nature of the bedroom tax. And therein lies the truth in terms of the number of properties available for people to move to about the bedroom tax and its impact, because the government knew before it introduced the policy that there were insufficient smaller properties for people to move to. That was the picture right across the country. And even if we gave the government the benefit of the doubt about their motives before implementation, their own interim report into the bedroom tax after implementation revealed that it was not meeting its key aim of freeing up larger council properties. So just 4.5% of affected tenants have been able to move to smaller accommodation. And at the same time as just 4.5% of people being able to move and be rehoused, 60% of people affected were in arrears within the first 6 months of the introduction of the tax. The policy is simply not working. People are not able to move to smaller accommodation because that accommodation simply isn't there. So you have long-standing, reliable tenants who have been previously able to budget and pay their rent regularly, now cannot pay it and have built up significant arrears. I'll give way.
Okay, now.
Giving way, and in parts of London we're seeing people pushing to get two-bedroom properties because they're frightened they'll be hit by the bedroom tax, but that also reduces, if there was any availability of stock for people to move down to, if they do have the extra bedroom. So it's causing a squeeze in both directions.
Joe Stevens.
Absolutely, it's an absolutely valid point by the Honourable Lady. The most vulnerable have been hit hardest, and in the words of the Lord Chief Justice and his colleagues just a few weeks ago, the government's, quote, admitted discrimination, unquote, in the judicial review cases that I referred to earlier, has not been, quote, justified by the Secretary of State, unquote. And we now have the farcical situation where the government has appealed that decision and the legal costs of pursuing the appeal are likely to be greater than the amount it would cost them to exempt all those paying the bedroom tax who are victims of rape and domestic violence with panic rooms. I can only conclude that the government would rather pay money to lawyers than to rape victims, and I challenge the Minister to justify that action. Now, I think I can predict what the Minister's response to this debate will be. He will say that the government has made additional funding available to local authorities in the regions and in Wales in the form of discretionary housing payments. But my local authority, Cardiff Council, has had its DHP funding cut by over 26% between 2013-14 and 2015-16. And the regional impact for Cardiff of losing over a quarter of its DHP funding has hit hard. So it is a disingenuous argument to make to justify the bedroom tax. At the same time as imposing the tax and relying on DHP as the justification, the DHP funding itself is being cut. And the government's own report, which was sneaked out in a huge data dump on the very last day of the parliamentary term in December 2015, obviously hoping no one would notice, admitted that 75% of bedroom tax victims didn't get DHP, that 3/4 of those hit by the tax were cutting back on food, that only 5% had been able to move, and that 80% regularly ran out of money. Policy implementation of DHP has also been called into question. Evidence on the use of it has raised serious questions about the adoption of different practices by different local authorities, leading to allegations of a postcode lottery. There are references to disabled tenants, particularly those living in specifically adapted properties, struggling to access discretionary housing payments in some areas, coupled with issues around the need to submit repeated applications and the consequential uncertainty and anxiety associated with this, not to mention the exclusion of people who have lower levels of literacy. This isn't the first time that DHP and its impact on disabled people has been raised in this House. As long ago as the 9th of April in 2014, 5 Welsh Government ministers wrote to Lord Freud calling for an exemption from the bedroom tax for disabled tenants who had had adaptations made to their homes. And they cited issues with DHP as one of the reasons for needing this broad exemption. And I'll quote a small passage from that letter, if I may. Disabled tenants cannot easily up sticks and move home. They should be exempt from these reforms and should not be left to rely on help from the discretionary housing benefit system. Our analysis of the discretionary housing payment system shows that demand far outweighs the number of applications being approved. In the first half of the financial year 2013-14, demand increased by around 260% compared to the same period a year earlier in 15 Welsh local authorities. So Cardiff's 26% plus cut in funding for DHP, coupled with that increased number of applications, presents another one of those stark sums that even I can work out. Households with disabled tenants having to pay bedroom tax, which cannot be offset through DHP when DHP funding has been cut, simply doesn't add up. And it's another example of the government's policy hitting those who can least afford it the hardest. Tomorrow, we have an Opposition Day debate on another of the policy responsibilities of the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, the adverse impact of the speeding up of the state pension age on around 2.6 million women. And I know from discussions with constituents that many of those being advised and represented in bedroom tax appeals in my constituency are exactly those same women adversely affected by changes to the state pension age. There are also women who are disabled or who are carers. So there is a double, a triple, a quadruple whammy on women. And as with so many of this government's policies, yet again it seems that women are bearing the brunt. It's time for the government to finally accept that the bedroom tax is bad policy. In the words of the Chief Executive of the National Housing Federation, David Orr, it is an unfair, ill-planned disaster that is hitting our poorest families. It doesn't work, it causes severe hardship, it hits the most vulnerable. And so I say to the Minister today, please listen to the public. It's time for the bedroom tax to be binned.
Corrie Wilson.